Welcome to our special lunchtime edition of It Takes a Viking, the official podcast of the Salem State University Alumni Association and Foundation community. We are very pleased to welcome to the show Assistant Vice President for HSI MSI Initiatives at Salem State University, Dr. Elisa Castillo. Dr. Castillo, good afternoon. How are you?
I am great, Mike. Thank you. And thank you so much for inviting me to be on this podcast today. I'm super excited to be here.
We are so thrilled and thankful for you spending the time with us today. Obviously, this is an enormous undertaking that the institution is going through, knowing that you're a very, very busy person these days. So certainly appreciate you taking the time to help our community kind of understand what HSI is, what MSI is, why it's important, why we're going for it. But before we do that, let's just take a moment to introduce you to our community that may be watching along at home that may not know you. So the first question I would love to ask you is just, how did you end up at Salem State?
Awesome, Mike. Thank you. That's a great question. And I actually have been at Salem State for 19 years. I started at Salem State in 2005. I was working at Northeastern University at the time as a psychologist and multicultural specialist back then in the early 2000s. And I loved the work. I loved working directly with students and doing outreach to students of color, really thinking about student success. But my passion has always been with public higher education. And so around that time, I had gotten married and I had actually moved to Salem. And when I saw a position open up in the counseling center, I was thrilled to apply for the position, and of course thrilled to be hired in the counseling center at that time. So back in the early 2000s, I was doing therapy in the counseling center. I was working as the training director. So we would have interns and postdocs from all the different Boston area schools who were training to become psychologists, do a practicum with us. So I was responsible for them at that time, really, again, helping them think about how to really take good care of our students and really kind of think about students from a holistic perspective. So over the years, my role evolved, but it was such a good fit. And I was so lucky to be able to start at Salem State back then.
And more recently, obviously, with the challenges presented by the pandemic, specifically, you were kind of at the forefront in terms of Salem State's response to how we handled things here on campus. I know yourself and former Chief Labonte were kind of our co-chairs of our response task force. Can you talk a little bit about, because obviously that had never been seen in your tenure or anybody's really time on campus. So that must have been a unique set of challenges and opportunities that you were up against.
Absolutely. Challenges and opportunities, as it turns out. But yeah, it was interesting to go from a career where I was kind of focused on kind of supporting individual students, right, and kind of helping them through hard times, helping them reach their potential, to then, be promoted to director, so kind of overseeing the counseling side and the health side for a while. So I learned a lot about public health, and that was really helpful moving forward. And I was also very lucky at the time. I had also gotten the grant from the Department of Violence Against Women to support any student impacted by sexual assault or domestic violence, and have more support for students at risk of hunger and homelessness, and kind of that caring concern team that we built on campus. So the fact that I was already kind of thinking about our students holistically and kind of expanding services for our students and thinking about prevention actually all came together when the pandemic happened, right, in 2020. None of us really saw it coming. And even when Chief Labonte and I were having those initial conversations, we were thinking, oh, this is going to be a couple weeks or a month that we're going to have to deal with a crisis situation. None of us knew that it was going to take years, right, for us to kind of come through something that none of us had ever seen before. But I was very fortunate because I did have a prevention lens. I did have great partnerships and relationships across campus. And it was really a privilege to be able to work with our leadership, our campus community on how to get through a really difficult time. And also really think about different people had different needs, right? Some students had to stay on campus and we needed to create a safe space for students to stay on campus. Some folks, had vulnerabilities and really needed to remain remote even after other folks were able to, resume in-person classes. And how do we take care of folks who still need to be remote? So it was certainly challenging, but we learned so much through going through that experience. And in a small way, it was really helpful for me to be able to really get a sense of our community kind of from A to Z, right? I really got to really think about our entire campus community and different aspects of our operation and really help us through change, like help us through a difficult time and help us through change and really think about our wellness and think about our potential as we moved through that time. And so in some ways, those skills and that opportunity has kind of helped me now in this position as I'm hoping to lead the campus through some positive change now as we kind of think about becoming a Hispanic and minority serving institution.
And before we get to that, which is my next question for you, but as you've just touched on looking at things holistically and community investment and things like that, as if everything that you've done over the last nearly 20 years with counseling and health services, the COVID task force, your new role, you're also a pretty ingrained member of the greater Salem community, right? I mean, I know you've served at Hawk on their board and talk a little bit about why some of that work is important to you as well.
Oh, thank you. Absolutely. Like I love our community. I love Salem. I love the North Shore. I've been living here for over 20 years. And while I really see Salem State as being kind of my center, right, the community that I'm most connected to, I think it's so important to be an active, kind of civically engaged, right, community member. And so I've been fortunate to serve on a few boards here on the North Shore over the years. I was on the board of Plummer Home maybe over 10 years ago. I've been serving on the board of Hawk for the last 4 or 5 years. I'm currently the president of the board of Hawk, really thinking about how we provide support and services to the North Shore community for anybody impacted by interpersonal violence, and really thinking about advocating for change, maybe in the judicial system, right? Thinking about immigration issues, legal issues, support services, housing, right? We have such a beautiful community that comes together to support each other and to try to meet the needs of our community, but there are always kind of new challenges, right, that we need to face. And so working together is really the way that we can accomplish positive change. And there are just so many wonderful partners, right? So many of them are connected to Salem State, are alumni, or have folks working in their organizations that are alumni of Salem State. And so it's really nice to be able to come together to help find solutions and help build community, support each other's good work. So yes, I love being part of the community here on the North Shore.
And I think that kind of touches on a little bit about what I wanted to ask you next, in that obviously you're transitioning from one role that you've been a member of that department, a leader of that department for so long, that this is a completely new opportunity. This is a new position. It's never been created before. You're the first to hold it. And so what was it about this position at this time that made you say, you know what, I feel like this is a leap that I'd like to take? And then if you can kind of go into, I guess, just to initiate the conversation of why we're talking today, what is HSI MSI status and what does it mean for Salem State?
Awesome. So let me try to take that one at a time, but if I miss something, let's make sure we get back to it. So to kind of talk a little bit about my transition, right? In some ways it was a hard transition because I have, obviously I'm a licensed psychologist. I have, dedicated my career to both kind of providing healthcare, mental health in particular, but healthcare in general. And really thinking about, it's important to be well, as part of your journey, right? As a college student, your personal journey to success. And I have a wonderful team in counseling and health services and student life that I've worked so closely with over the years. So thinking about a different role was certainly something new for me. I hadn't really been thinking about that prior to this. But at the same time, I've always been interested in kind of institutional change. I've always been interested in areas related to social justice, related to supporting our diverse student population. I've been very active in the Salem State community over the years, serving on different committees, helping to write our diversity statement, helping to advocate for, diversity in our curriculum, and all the different things that we've done over the years at Salem State that we're very proud of. And so we've been talking about Salem State is going to become an HSI eventually, right? We've been talking about that a little by little, especially over the last 5 years as we've seen our student enrollment become more and more diverse at Salem State. So it's always been on the radar of campus leadership that this is something that eventually would be an important designation for our campus. But as we came out of the pandemic, there were a couple things that were happening for me in terms of thinking about, maybe I can play a role in terms of kind of that campus leadership, organizational change. I've been fortunate to have these relationships and to have this perspective, and maybe this is something that I can contribute to. And paying attention to Latino student success in particular has always been something that's been on my mind and close to my heart. So, obviously I do identify as Latina. I grew up in Puerto Rico and I graduated from the University of Puerto Rico. And when I got my PhD in counseling psychology, there were two things that I was paying attention to in my career. One thing was college student mental health, because I know how important those college years are for us developmentally in terms of our growth, right, as humans. But I've also been paying attention to kind of disparities, right, in our society. And so at the time when I was doing my PhD, the percentage of Latino students who were graduating from high school was much lower kind of than the average population. And of course, there were reasons for that, but we knew that there was something that needed special attention, right? If we wanted to see that improve and change, we had to pay attention to it. So my dissertation was focused on psychosocial cultural factors that predict academic persistence for Latino students. So I've been familiar with the research and the scholarship, and I've been paying attention to that topic since the early 90s, if I'm going to date myself. And so I've been thinking about how that applies to colleges and universities, what that looks like here in Massachusetts. I've been members of different professional organizations that pays attention to Latino student success. And so as we were coming out of the pandemic, and the percentage of Latino students on our campus was now over 20%, 22%. We realized, in conversations with the provost and the president and leadership that we're kind of on that precipice. And if we wanted to really do it well, we really needed to give it kind of focused attention, and we needed it to be really a community effort. It's not something I'm doing by myself. It's something that we're doing as a community. And so when the opportunity came up to really kind of lead that work, I kind of volunteered to say, hey, let me help run this group that's going to work on preparing us to become a really, truly Hispanic and minority serving institution. And when President Keenan agreed to create a leadership position, I was thrilled to kind of put my hat in the ring. So just very fortunate to be in this role now. I adore Salem State. I know that Salem State is a great institution. We have so many people as part of our community that are so passionate, that give so much to our students. And I think we really can open doors and really change lives. And I think this is one more way in which we're going to be able to do that here at Salem State.
And so in considering that, obviously this is not something like a light switch where you just flick it and it's on and it
Mhm.
happens. There's some legwork that happens behind the scenes to obtain this designation. And
Mhm.
I think one of the questions that typically comes with what is HSI, what is MSI,
Mhm.
um, why are you focusing on that? Is that this isn't a Salem State designed or created idea. This is a
Mhm.
nationally funded program at the
Mhm.
federal level. But understanding that there are certain benchmarks that need to be hit, can you talk a little bit about what some of those are, kind of um, where we are maybe in the process of achieving those?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you're absolutely right, Mike. It's interesting that Massachusetts hasn't really paid a lot of attention to Hispanic serving and minority serving institutions. You know, New England and Massachusetts in particular, we're a very well-educated state. We have so many institutions of higher learning, but we really don't have a lot of minority-serving institutions in Massachusetts. We certainly have community colleges that are, but we really don't have the large universities, the comprehensive universities in that space. But it is a national program that's been, funded since the 70s, right? So according to our Department of Education and the Department of Interior, there are institutions that are called minority serving institutions that are basically the universities that serve very diverse student populations or enroll very diverse student populations. And I think a lot of us are familiar with the MSIs, the historical MSIs, like historically Black colleges, right? I think we're familiar with those. They've been around for decades and decades and decades. And that's one kind of an MSI. The other kinds of MSIs are institutions that don't start off as MSIs, right? It's not necessarily part of their history or their original mission, but given kind of changes in demographics, changes in enrollment, all of a sudden those universities become universities that are enrolling a very diverse student population. And based on that, you can apply to be either a Hispanic serving or a Black serving or Asian Pacific Islander serving institution, for example, Indigenous serving institution. And so the criteria to be able to apply to become a Hispanic serving institution is when more than 25% of your enrollment identifies as Latino or Hispanic. And there are a few other boxes we have to check, but that's really the big box is the enrollment. And the demographics here in Massachusetts continue to become more diverse. The Latino population in general is the population that is growing the fastest in the country, as well as in Massachusetts specifically. When you look at our K through 12, school districts around us, a lot of our school districts are 40% Hispanic, 50% Hispanic, 75% Hispanic. And so it's so important for our Commonwealth that all of our students really see themselves thinking about furthering their education, thinking about that college degree, right? We really want everybody to have that opportunity to access an education and get a really good education. But we also need to have a society where folks, right, are educated and we can kind of meet those workforce demands and even if somebody doesn't identify as a student of color or Latino, we need all of our students to understand diversity, to know how to work with diverse teams, to be comfortable in different cultural spaces, maybe be able to manage multiple languages. That's important, right, in our kind of global workforce today. And so we know that Hispanic serving institutions and minority serving institutions are really those institutions that are making a true difference in their communities, right? They're giving access to communities that maybe haven't had a lot of access before or haven't felt like they really belonged in higher education or leadership before. So we're providing that access, but we're also helping to kind of transform lives, families, and communities. Most HSIs are really well known for making a big difference in terms of kind of social mobility, right? And Salem State is one of those institutions where we know that we can make such a difference in our students' lives. So it's kind of it's natural. It feels natural to me, right? That, as Salem State, we've always been proud of our diverse student population. I think our students, a lot of students really, really enjoy kind of being together and learning from each other and advocate for each other. We have a very active student body. And so really naming that, saying, this is who we are a diverse campus, and we want it to be a space where everybody feels included, even if you're from an immigrant family, even if English isn't your first language, right? Even if, maybe your experiences at other K through 12s weren't always the best. We want to be intentional. And I think that's the other part about us becoming a Hispanic serving institution, is that a lot of institutions, especially in other parts of the country where the demographics are a little different, kind of naturally become HSIs just because of the demographics of the area. But they don't really talk about it in leadership. It's not on their website, right? Students who go there maybe don't even know that it's an HSI. I think we want to take a different approach to that. We want to be really, really intentional, because our goal is not just to enroll students. Our goal is for our students to really have an amazing college experience, and to really be able to kind of open those doors for our students. And we want all of our students to be able to be their true self, right? It kind of breaks my heart when I hear about students at different stages of their education kind of being embarrassed of their accent, or kind of being embarrassed to kind of share where their family is from, or feel like they're being treated differently, right? So I don't want students at Salem State to feel like they have to navigate that and worry about that. I really want to create an environment where we're all proud of who we are. We can all kind of show up, and that the institution is ready to meet our students where they're at.
And I think that's such a great way to frame it, in that, people don't realize or don't remember that, in the 1800s, when Salem State was opened as a normal school, the purpose of the school was to create educators, and so those folks could go out and teach, and you would have this essentially pyramid effect, that the entire intent was to serve the communities in which you were a part of.
Mm-hmm.
And as we know, times have changed, but the mission is still the same, in that we're here to provide a quality education. We're here to serve the needs of our community. And it's almost crazy in a sense to say, look, it can't just be focused on the quality of the education anymore, because that's not the only piece to these students when they come here. It's that they come from different places and they come from different backgrounds, and identifying that that's now an additional way that we need to serve them, I think makes this work so key and so critical to us moving forward successfully as an institution. So I know you mentioned, one of the benchmarks specifically being 25% students identifying as, Hispanic and minority. And do you have a sense of where we are? And this was one of the questions that was submitted in advance by Dr. Marian Frost in the nursing school. Love her. Do you have an idea of what the current percentage of HSI and MSI students enrolled at the college are?
Sure, thank you. And I also adore our chair of the nursing department. So that's a great question. So the kind of the most important criteria, like I said, is for 25% of our students to identify as Hispanic when they enroll in the institution. That is really looking at our undergraduate program. It's not really kind of counting our graduate program, but it is counting our undergraduate kind of full-time and part-time. The way the federal government looks at it is they actually look at it based on credit load, not necessarily individual students, right? And so when you look at individual students right now, 24% of our students identify as Hispanic. But when you look at credit load, we're at 23% identifying as Hispanic. And so we're very close, right? We're very close to that 25%. So based on that, we do anticipate that, either probably 2025 will be applying for the designation. And working with the federal government, they have to do their own analysis, and that can sometimes take a semester or a year. So if we don't get it in 2025, I'm pretty confident we would be able to get it by 2026. Obviously, that's if trends continue, right? We've been increasing our enrollment, especially of Hispanic or Latino students, over 1% every year. So we've been 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, right? So now we're at 24. So we're anticipating next year we'll be able to hit the 25% mark. So that is, again, the most important criteria. We are being intentional about saying Hispanic and minority serving, right? Because the goal is for all of our students, right, to access the opportunities that they need in order to be successful in their education, and really not just necessarily pass all your classes. And again, our curriculum is amazing. Our faculty are amazing. We want our students to study, get good grades, get the most out of that degree. But as you're saying, we also want them to take advantage of internships. We also want them to be inspired, right, by the guest speakers and the lectures. And we want them to develop great social networks and best friends right on campus. So really thinking about that holistic college experience for our students. Currently, over 40% of our students do identify as students of color. And I'm really thinking about all of our students as we think about that. The federal government has a new kind of term that talks about students who've been underserved by higher education in the past, and they kind of frame that very broadly. So anybody who's a parent while going to school would fall under that category. Anybody who's working full-time in addition to going to school full-time, students with disabilities, students part of the LGBTQIA community, right, kind of fall under that category, and part-time transfer students, things like that. And so that is a lens that I'm using when I'm thinking about us becoming a Hispanic serving. Yes, I'm passionate about our Latino students. Yes, I'm working on translating materials into Spanish, but it's more than that, right? It's how do we meet our students of today where they're at, and how do we really create those really transformational opportunities, which we do already, but how do we expand it? How do we broaden it? How to make sure that everybody is able to take advantage of that?
And I think one of the things as we're talking about this that would be naive to not at least look at or consider, and without going down a political rabbit hole, is that, there are likely, we don't require students to declare, citizenship or ethnicity or race or anything like that. And so given the climate over the last several years, particularly around folks who identify as dreamers, we're already likely serving a larger population than what we can declare, which I think is terrific. But I think a program like this just allows us to formalize it and say, we're here for you, and we want to help.
Absolutely.
And so I'm just super grateful for the work that you're doing. I am curious.
Add something to that, Mike, because
Sure,
I
of course.
appreciate you bringing that up. And of course, it's delicate, right? Because folks need to be comfortable. Not everybody shares everything, right, or is able to share. Students who are still going through that immigration process, which is a challenging process, right, might not be at a place where they can get federal financial aid. And so college is still out of reach due to finances for a lot of folks. And so we were really proud that Salem State became the first campus partner of the Dream US, which is a national organization that provides full scholarships for immigrant undocumented students, or DACA DREAMers, as you said. And so this coming academic year is the first time that we are offering that to our students. There are only 2 universities in Massachusetts that are partners with Dream US that are supporting our immigrant undocumented students like this. And at Salem State was the first, and then UMass Boston was the second. So that's exactly right. As we started to prepare to become a Hispanic serving institution and wanting to do it right, I got together with 50 community members, including folks right on your team, faculty, staff, students, and alumni, who came together to say, if we're going to do this right, if we're really going to center our practices on our current students, on our students of color, on our immigrant students, right, our Latino students, what do we need? And additional support, financial support, especially for students that have kind of immigrated to the U.S. that are still going through that process, was one of the things on the list. And so I was thrilled that within the first year we were kind of able to achieve that, and we're kind of paying attention to that.
And one of the things I know that, and this is just something that we've talked about offline, is that, you mentioned earlier, you've been a part of some different professional organizations and things like that. So I'm kind of wondering if you can explain a little bit some of the legwork that you've done to this point to get us where we are now. I know, conferences and associations and things like that. Can you talk about some of those resources that exist in this space?
Absolutely. Thank you. So like I said, Salem State has been thinking about this for a number of years. For example, our provost came from a Hispanic serving institution, right, when he came from Texas, and was really thinking about that and really encouraged us to connect. And, several folks, right, on our leadership team have been thinking about that. So for the last 2-3 years, we've been starting to attend those major national conferences that talk about best practices for Hispanic serving institutions. And so I've had the privilege of traveling with President Keenan and others in leadership to the HACU conference, which happens every fall, which is the Hispanic Association of Colleges and Universities. And they are a tremendous resource for colleges and universities. They're really, really strong advocates for the importance of Hispanic serving institutions, the power of Hispanic serving institutions. They have really strong connections with the federal government, local government, and provide access to all kinds of resources for our students, including internships in Washington, D.C., and things like that. So I've attended several conferences with our leadership, but I've also taken students to some of the HACU conferences. I took students to Washington, D.C. last April, where our students were able to learn firsthand from the leaders in their organization, but they were able to meet with leaders of cabinet. Like we had a fireside chat with the Secretary of Education, Dr. Cardona, the Secretary of Transportation, Buttigieg. I mean, to be in the same room with those folks was so inspiring for our students. And then to be able to go to Senator Markey's office, right, to advocate with our local politicians was just such a tremendous experience for our students. We're sending another group of students this April with our Center for Civic Engagement, which is such a natural partnership for HSI. So that's one example. Another example, there's an organization called ASSI, which is the Association of Hispanic Serving Institution Educators. And that's a conference that's really all about best practices. What's happening in the classroom? What are those supports that our students need? How do you really build supports that are helping to build community and helping students get that success? So I'm actually headed out to that conference with a group of faculty next week, where we're going to continue to bring back best practices. And then there are national policy organizations. There's Excelencia in Education, which is a national kind of data policy focused on Latino student success. We're partnering with Latinos for Education, another national policy organization that has kind of a seat here in Boston in Massachusetts. So those connections are so important, so that we're making sure that we're doing this right, we're doing this intentionally, we're learning from each other, we're following best practices. And then based on the information we gathered is when we kind of came back together with our campus partners and we said, hey, we want to do this. We want to do this right. This is a community issue. This is not an individual issue. This is not an Elisa issue or a provost or a president. This is our community. These are our students. How do we know that we're doing it? Yes, we want to see our enrollments, but it's not just about the enrollments. It's about really doing it right. And so that's where I was just thrilled that over 50, I think it was 55 faculty, students, staff, alumni came together to be really thoughtful about what do we need as an institution. If we put a student of color in the center, right? If we put a Latino student in the center, maybe they're first generation, right? Maybe their parents didn't go to college. Maybe they're working, right, 1 or 2 jobs while they're coming to school. Maybe they can only come to school part-time for a while, right? What is it that student needs to be successful? And we really looked at everything. We looked at data, we looked at programs, we looked at curriculum, we looked at policies, we looked at professional development. And based on that, we kind of wrote that roadmap, the Salem State roadmap to servingness, which of course is live on our website. Everything is public, everything is transparent. And we were thrilled that within a semester, we were able to do that work. And last summer, the president and our PEC approved that, and it's now part of our strategic plan. So just a wonderful, wonderful community effort.
I love it. And as we've been talking, we've obviously been, and I'll put it on the screen again now, salemstate.edu/HSI, where it's a one-stop shop of everything that it means to be an Hispanic serving institution, minority serving institution. Also on the website, for anybody that may have questions that wants to reach out to Dr. Castillo directly, you can email hsi@salemstate.edu. A couple of great resources for anybody that wants to learn more, but I would certainly encourage you to visit that website. There's a ton of information and resources there. I want to share one other comment, not so much a question that came in. Bear with me just a moment as I get to it here. From Lauren Mountain. I don't know if you remember that name, but Lauren shares, you were instrumental to my success in college when you were in the counseling center. Happy to see you still leading at Salem State. thank you for all you did for me and continue to do for SSU students.
Oh my goodness.
Lauren, thank you for your comment.
I know, Lauren, I'm very touched. I'm very touched. And thank you so much for listening today and for sharing that. And again, I think I was so privileged to have worked in the counseling center directly to really get to know our students so personally, right? To really kind of understand our students' stories and to really kind of help folks reach their potential and move forward, one step at a time. So, and that continues to guide me today as I think about kind of the big picture of our institution. But thank you so much. That's so sweet.
Well, you more or less just took the last question that I was going to ask you right out of my mouth, because I always like to end with, what does it mean to be a member of the Salem State community? And I think you just landed that plane very nicely. So, Dr. Castillo, again, I know you're extraordinarily busy these days, so I just really want to thank you and tell you how much I appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon for our kind of brown bag lunch webinar today conversation. But again, for anybody that's interested in learning more, you can visit salemstate.edu/HSI. It's a great one-stop resource right on our website, or you can email hsi@salemstate.edu to learn a little bit more for all the great resources and information that are available about Salem State becoming an Hispanic and minority serving institution. And with that, again, I'd like to thank Dr. Castillo for joining us today. I'd like to thank everybody for following along and watching on Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter/X. I still call it Twitter, and I probably always will. But it was great to connect with you again today, and thank you again so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mike. This was a lovely conversation. I hope we do it again. And warm wishes to all of our alumni and friends out there listening this morning. Thank you so much.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for watching.